Now let us get this straight. Let me try it one more time. It is not my problem. It is not the Negro problem. It is your problem.
The Green Mile fits within a cinematic tradition based on white supremacy, aimed at white audiences, helping them to come to terms with living in a society with as its open secret that it is based on racial terror. This cinematic tradition infamously begins with Birth of a Nation, in which the gallant South is brought to ruin through the end of slavery, leading to black lawlessness. The white gentlemen restore the patriarchal white supremacist order by creating the Ku Klux Klan. Birth of a Nation proudly puts on display what the US body politic is based upon: white supremacy and patriarchy. Over time, this explicit and violent display slowly loses its legitimacy, but it does not disappear nor does it cease to structure US politics, but the changes and concessions due to ongoing resistance makes it necessary for this to disappear from view. Abating the anxieties of a white America that is constantly in crisis, Hollywood has played a key role in ensuring its white viewership that they are on the right side of history and that they remain at the center of the world. A brief look at 100 years of Hollywood since Birth of a Nation shows how the most distinguished movies ensure white centrality and white goodness, whilst continuing to construct and extract white identity through and from a black other.
If you don't care what folks says about this family, I does.
And it never occurred to me that I might fall in love with a Negro.
Look at that. Ain't nobody never given me that book before, Miss Daisy.
You're going to do something big for Joe. You wait and see.
There you have it. No more colored restrooms.
The presence of black characters on screen are allowed only to the extent that they do not threaten whiteness. The changing roles continue to play the same role, that of reassuring the morality and centrality of the white protagonist. The Green Mile plays a special part in this tradition in its attempt at addressing and coming to terms with a history based on racial terror. To set the scene for this argument, let's first return to Birth of a Nation. In a key scene to understanding the ideology and fantasies of white patriarchal rule, a black man, a white actor in blackface, attempts to rape a white woman. She runs away and throws herself off a cliff rather than her honor being violated by a black man. White masculinity emerges as a defense of the purity of white womanhood and the purity of the nation by murdering black men and symbolically mastering the threat of racial contamination and sexual violation. Birth of a Nation widely popularized the KKK and gave rise to a new era of racial terror and lynching. As a sexual racial spectacle, lynchings play a key role in the socialization of white boys and men, crafting their sense of white masculinity through collective violence against black men accused of and fantasized as sexual predators. The literal castration that was often part of the lynchings play the symbolic role of taking possession of the phallus. The black phallus, imagined as being infinitely potent and savage, threatens the God-ordained hierarchical patriarchal order where white patriarchs rule over their wives, children, and slaves. The always sexualized threat of the disruption of this order calls on white boys and men to become the protectors of their women and preserve the purity of their bloodline. By taking away the black penis, white men ensure their own phallic power as the progenitor and protector of the social order. Through the emasculation of black men, white masculinity is constructed and the message is clear. We have the phallus, and you are not safe with your manhood, with your humanity. We can take it and do with it as we please. The indulgence in unbounded violence is thus a ritual to construct their identity as white men and to instill terror in anyone who dares to challenge the white supremacist patriarchal order. The construction of whiteness and masculinity is justified by the idea of protecting white women's purity. The white patriarch's protection of white women from black men has the additional layer of keeping white women under control. Policing any illicit transracial desire, the feminine ideals of purity that women ought to strive for means submission to the white patriarchal family. The false accusations of black men as potential or actual violators of white womanhood makes it a justified act of revenge and protection, magically transforming the most heinous crimes into a moral duty to protect women and the race. Through racial violence, white masculinity is crafted by becoming the possessor of the phallus and taking away the manhood of black men. The Green Mile explicitly evokes the myth of the black rapist in order to subvert the trope, showing that racism is bad and false. It does so not by challenging the white patriarchal order, but by making a black man humbly and unequivocally serve this order.
Yes, sir, boss.
He does not have to be emasculated by a lynching mob because he is already emasculated. His magical powers, an allusion to the white fearful fantasies of limitless sexual potency of black men, are harmless like an angelic magical child, and the sexual prowess no longer threatens white masculinity, but is passed on from the black man to ensure the potency and long life of the white protagonist.
A part of the power that worked through him spilled into me.
What? He infected you with life?
Pastoral scene of the gallant South.
The slaveholding South presented itself as a benign patriarchal order based on a God-given hierarchy of race. It was an order that benefited everyone, masters and enslaved alike. Enslaved people were presented like children. Unable to govern themselves, they need to be guided by a strict but fair disciplinary hand of the fully mature patriarch. If they obey the patriarch, it benefits them and the social order. The obedient child slave is the happy slave. They participate in the harmonious order of things. The rebel is the perverse pathological child out of line and threatening the social order. Under the yoke of slavery, these children slaves participate in the boons of civilization and Christianity. Without the necessary discipline and punishment, the African would become an unruly force of its own perverse, pathological, destructive savagery, undermining the God-given hierarchical patriarchal social arrangements. The patriarchs rule over the household, over their good Christian white wives and children, and look over the enslaved as a good father. The Green Mile, the prison ward, represents exactly this patriarchal white supremacist social arrangement. Good men rule here, supported by good Christian wives, taking good care of their children with a benign paternal authority and, when necessary, with the use of force. Among the colleagues there is honorable fraternity with a respected and natural hierarchy of ranks. Each of them is a patriarch supported by a loving and caring wife. Their purpose is to rule the prisoners with an orderly but fair hand. The prisoners are portrayed as a group of children. There's the toddler-like Dale, who tries to be a good boy and obey the parental figures, but sometimes displays cruelty and selfishness in a typical childish way. There's John Coffey, an innocent magical child who wouldn't dream of disobeying the boss.
Yes, sir, boss.
Then there's Billy the Kid, who represents the perverse, pathological child who follows his violent and sexual urges and cannot be disciplined. Later it turns out that he is the child rapist and murderer of the little girls. The queer coding of Billy the Kid is significant, strengthening the link in the collective unconscious between straightness and morality, and queerness and criminality, and especially queerness as a threat to children. 19th and 20th century developmental psychology saw in homosexuality, queerness, and transness sexual perversions that are the result of improper development of the child. The well-behaved, well-disciplined child will grow up as a good heterosexual mature subject. Queerness as perversion is a sign of regression or development thrown off course, which makes one unfit for society and must be policed, corrected, or locked away. The fact that the only way to undermine the myth of the black rapist is by introducing a queer-coded child rapist is telling. The good benign patriarchs rule based on a natural authority that is respected by the obedient children and disobeyed by the unruly children. It is only then that the patriarchs use their legal and moral right to violence, to correct and discipline. State violence is thus a legitimate, corrective force to maintain the harmonious social order, rather than the tool to subjugate large parts of the population and to extract value from them. There's another way in which the Green Mile is a microcosm of the South, or the founding of settler colonial America. Tellingly, the first prisoner to be executed is an indigenous man. There's a hint of his savage past, but Paul reassures his colleague that Bitterbuck is in fact a Christian. Here, the indigenous prisoner represents the double murder of indigenous people in the genocidal US project. First, it is based on the physical extermination of the majority of indigenous people. Then, there's the attempted genocidal assimilation techniques to cut off indigenous people from their past and make them serviceable to white settler America. In the US mythology, indigenous people belong to the past and have to disappear for modern America to emerge. In the movie as well, the murder of the prisoner is nothing more than a prelude, a setting the scene for viewers to understand the culture and functioning of the Green Mile. He is never spoken of again. Indigeneity disappears from the story and provides merely the backdrop for the real story. The Green Mile distinguishes between the good disciplinary violence of the benign patriarchs and the excessive violence of immature pathological children. This is represented not only by the prisoners but also by the bad prison ward, who is represented as the spoiled child opposed to the responsible, disciplined, good prison wards. In the magnificent trick that Hollywood excels at, the racism of the social arrangement disappears from view and only appears as the result of some bad people.
One bad hamburger at McDonald's does not make McDonald's bad.
Excessive force against racialized people, the foundational and gratuitous violence that the US is premised upon, is not part of the social arrangements. It is an act of a handful of bad men who are kept in check by good men who maintain the social order from which everyone benefits, although at times it requires a strong hand to maintain the balance. It takes good white patriarchs to keep the bad racism in check and to protect the children slaves from this wrong type of violence by using the right kind of violence. In the movie, we are only introduced to white women. They are all good Christian obedient wives or widows whose only interests seem to be to take care of the physical and emotional needs of their husbands and to anticipate their thoughts and feelings. In this patriarchal order, the wives are infantilized too. Their merely supportive status is portrayed as equality, parity, and balance. But in this representation of the perfect white Christian heterosexual couple, the wife has no reality beyond her relation to her husband. The infantilization is clear with the wife of Warden Hal Morris. The doctors have told him, but not her, what the results of the tests are, and he keeps this information from her. The same strange dualism of the good innocent child and the perverted obscene child is played out in this scene. Everyone knows her as the most decent Christian wife, but because of the tumor it is as if she is possessed by a demon and becomes unrecognizable. After she is healed, she embodies an angelic, childlike creature of white purity and grace. The patriarchal subtext is clear. To become vulgar, to swear, to break with the expected role pattern of the perfect wife is a sickness and a threat. Better keep yourself in check, otherwise the men will make sure to do so. Once again, the benign patriarchs keep the information about what happened to her from her for her own good. This infantilization shows that it is only the patriarchs who have the right to knowledge and action and decide what is best for others, how much they are allowed to know, and to what extent they are allowed to participate to maintain the delicate balance of the social order. Although the pastoral care or the parental relation runs through all social relations, it is notable that actual children are absent. We only have the two white girls who are not characters at all, but props and stand-ins for white purity and innocence, a familiar trope for the United States, obsessed with the image of white feminine youth and the scandals of their violation or disappearance. They are never characters with perspectives. The white girl is a prop in the fantasy of the US white supremacist patriarchal order.
Oh, what's your missus, please?
At the surface level, the movie makes the viewers identify with the sympathetic non-racist protagonist. We are asked to disidentify with the bad racist, and thus we can enjoy the film with a clear conscience in white innocence. At a structural level, it repeats the white supremacist social arrangement that place white men at the center and is based on racialized criminalized others to be kept in their place. What is the price of the alleged non-racism? If the foundational myth of Birth of a Nation shows the clear abjection and murder of the black other as the outsider threat for the United States to come into being, the alleged non-racism works by emptying out the threat that comes from the figure of the black man or the black rapist. Like the good, meek, obedient slave, he will never question his proper place in the social order and the body politic, nor try to escape it or fight it. He will meekly submit to an order that he will never belong to, participate in, or have a say in. This is the function of the trope of the magical African, to ensure and spiritually guide the path of the white protagonist without having a will of his own. Two main components of the trope of the magical African are that he himself has no backstory,
Like he dropped out of the sky.
and he assists and guides the white protagonist on his journey.
He infected you with lies?
What does the trope of the magical African signify? That rather than human beings with interiority and agency, black characters are symbols that serve as a function to keep the white symbolic universe coherent, ensuring the centrality and morality of white people. John Coffey will never question or challenge the social arrangement that put him unjustly on death row. He continues to admire the system that puts him to death. His only and deepest wish is to see a movie. The black man, emptied of all interiority and motivation, is shown to be dreaming the American dream, admiring a white heterosexual couple finding their happiness on the screen. The magical African cannot have any interiority or agency outside of its service to the white protagonist. Within this anti-black symbolism, black male sexuality cannot be anything but a fantasy of disruption, excess, or transgression, never a human relationship. Two scenes are explicit in its allusions to the fantasy of the infinite sexual powers of the African, the healing scene of Paul and of Melinda. First, there's the scene where John Coffey magically heals Paul's waterwork issues. Paul has problems with urinating, read sexual performance, but through the mediation of the black man, a symbol of savage sexuality, of sex itself, the white protagonist restores his own vitality and sexual prowess. The imagined magical sexual powers are passed on from the black man to the white man, thus no longer offering a threat to white men, but serving them. The movie follows the structure closely of white men crafting their own whiteness and masculinity by symbolically castrating and murdering black men, cutting off the threat of the black phallus and thereby claiming ownership of its magical powers as white possessors of the phallus. The sexual threat of the African is neutralized through the figure of the obedient child slave, and his magical sexual powers do not have to be violently taken, but are offered as a gift of the black man to the white man. The force of nature gives the white man an eternal, sexually potent life. The healing scene of Melinda is even more troubling, as it carefully stages a racialized rape fantasy. What is the most feared in the white patriarchal symbolic world is also what is fantasized about and desired. For white women trapped into the confines of the civilized Christian marriage, the figure of black prowess in the racist collective unconscious offers itself as a central desire for transgression, pleasure, and escape. As we have seen, the myth of the black rapist offers a way for white men to abate the fears and fantasies of black sexuality and the fears of their wives' transgressive desires. Through the figures of white womanhood and the racialized violator, white men turn their rule by force into a moral tale of protection and revenge. The moral lessons it implies for white women is one of submission to white patriarchal rule. Here something slightly different occurs. The two faces of Melinda show the binary of white purity and the threat of an untamable female nature that desires blackness, that fantasizes an escape from white Christian civilization. This is portrayed as a devilish possession, going back to Christian symbolism of female nature being closer to Satan through their sexual depravity and the notion of blackness equated with evil. At the same time, the belief in white Christian civilization is upheld by saying that this is not who she really is. She needs to be restored to the image of the white pure woman that would be her true essence. The healing scene or exorcism is a way of channeling all the illicit desires that would make the white woman slide into depravity and transgress racially pure Christian civilization, and simultaneously for the men to take control over the otherwise threatening fantasy. It no longer is the threat of what would happen if they do not control their wives or black people, but they become the engineers of the fantasy, control the movements of both the black man and the white woman, and take pleasure in being the spectators of the fantasy. Without threatening the control of white men, the threat and fantasy of sex between a black man and a white woman can take place. After the enjoyment of this racial sexual spectacle, the white woman returns to her purity, to her white husband, and to Christian civilization, and the black man can be disposed of. If it's too harsh to show this disposability of black life after they have used it for their own purposes, sustaining both their lives and their racial and sexual identities, John Coffey reassures everyone that his illness and death has his consent. There's a transmutation of the fear and fantasy of the black rapist by making black life serviceable to white longevity. But despite this incorporation of the figure of the black man in the white self-representation of the past that makes it digestible for the 1990s by rendering the black stranger harmless, John Coffey still has to die. The natural magical reinvigoration of white life through the mediation and usurpation of blackness is not meant for John Coffey, nor for a society in which he could take part. If the white protagonist has some pangs of conscience about this extractive relationship to blackness, of extracting life and sex from a subjugated black person, the magical African is there to reassure the white protagonist that he does not want to dwell on the injustices of the past, let bygones be bygones, and that the white man is a good man. There is no duty to right what is wrong, to contribute to the liberation of a subjugated people that you reap the benefits from. It becomes an object of moral introspection for the good white protagonist, not a cause for political rebellion. This is the white supremacist anti-black contents of the supposed good anti-racist characters of the Green Mile that we are asked to identify with. Digging into the symbolism and visual culture of the North American South should not lead to the misconception that it is only applicable to a particular time and place. The anti-black symbolic universe extends through colonization across most of the globe and has its particular incarnations everywhere. After Senegalese and other African soldiers fought in the French army in the First World War, a racist moral panic and outrage ensued, tapping into white collective racial and sexual anxieties. Adolf Hitler blamed the Jews for letting the Rhineland in Germany be overflooded by Africans. The moral panic in the 1990s in the US surrounding so-called super predators legitimized the policing of black communities and the destruction of the lives of black teenage boys. The myth of the racialized rapist is now mobilized to justify the ongoing genocide of Palestinians. A concerted media effort in the West created the myth of mass and systematic rape on October 7, 2023, claims that have zero evidence and have been repeatedly debunked. There's no denying that excessive and unjustifiable violence occurred during the legitimate resistance of Palestinians during the Al-Aqsa flood operation, but what politicians and imperial media have tried to do is, just as with the myth of the black rapist in the United States, to create a monstrous villain that embodies all the fears of respectable civil, read white, society in order to cover up and justify a regime of colonial and racial terror. Despite the complete lack of evidence, these lies have been repeated so often that mainstream media in Europe and the United States now treat them as straightforward facts. The racist myth dehumanizes Arab men and serves to manufacture consent for genocide and apartheid. The myth of the racialized rapist had to be updated to a post-Me Too reality. In the 20th century, the white supremacist ideas of civilization often self-consciously present themselves as patriarchal, with traditional gender roles of man the protector and woman the passive victim as the coordinates for defining what civilized life is and ought to be, over and against the threat of sexual perversion and racial mixing. At the same time, Western imperial powers have always posed as feminist and in favor of gender equality, and later also as pro-gay, in order to portray the other as inherently oppressive and unequal. For a rendition of the myth of the racialized rapist in a post-Me Too climate, in which Israel presents itself to the world as a gay-friendly, sexually progressive and feminist nation in the midst of an oppressive Muslim Arab world, the patriarchal narrative is transformed into a fake feminist narrative that claims that we should listen to women's voices, even when there are no women to listen to. They allege an anti-Semitic bias in the media that would dehumanize Jewish women and not care about their sexual integrity. The shallow transformation of a heteropatriarchal narrative that sustains racial, gendered, and colonial domination calls for ongoing vigilance in seeing how tropes can be modified and updated to manufacture consent for ongoing dehumanization and dispossession, tapping into a collective unconscious sense of identity and morality that make us serve imperial power and the ruling classes instead of siding with the oppressed in the fight for the liberation of everyone.